Hey, recording is on.
All right, everybody. This is Commissioner Tao. Welcome. I'd like to call tonight's meeting of the North Bend Planning Commission to order. It's Thursday, January 28th, and our first meeting, I believe, of 2021. We'll start with roll call, and I'll just start at the top of the screen and go around. Commissioner Torgerson?
Here.
Commissioner Bovers?
Present.
Commissioner Bush?
Present.
Commissioner Greenberg?
Here.
Commissioner Blanco?
Here.
And Commissioner Mo?
Present.
And this is Commissioner Tao, present as well. Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Now is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any items that are not on tonight's Planning Commission agenda. Do we have any members of the public who would wish to speak tonight? Second call. All right, hearing none, we'll move to approval of tonight's agenda, which looks like we just have one topic to cover. Can I please get a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting?
Commissioner Blanco makes a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
That okay.
Was
Was that Susan Torgerson? I didn't catch
Yes.
that. Okay. Motion made by Commissioner Blanco, seconded by Commissioner Torgerson to approve the minutes for tonight's meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. We have an agenda for the evening. Next item is approval of the minutes for December the 10th, 2020, way back then. Is there a motion to approve the December 10th Planning Commission meeting minutes?
This is Commissioner Bush. I make a motion to approve the December 10th meeting minutes.
Thank you. Second? Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Motion made by Commissioner Bush, seconded by Commissioner Mo to approve the minutes for December 10th, 2020. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries and the minutes for December 10th are approved. Next up is our sole agenda topic. Jesse, are you going to lead us through the discussion tonight?
Actually,
Rebecca?
Rebecca's going to give a presentation to kind of warm you all up. And then at that point, we could start going through the actual content of the code and hear your feedback.
Sounds great. Rebecca, feel free when you're ready.
Great. So I put a little presentation together specifically on the regulating plan. It doesn't have anything on the code, the municipal code changes. So I'll go ahead and share that.
And just for context, tonight is information and discussion only, no action to take.
Correct. So we are looking to you to give us feedback and tell us what you want to see in this code. We, staff took a crack at it, but really we're looking for your feedback before the hearing to get, so this is just a draft code, for us to discuss.
Great, thank you.
So this is the form-based code area. So that this regulating plan covers what was the DC downtown commercial district. You'll see we noted on the plan the historic district area. But this form-based code covers the entire downtown commercial zone. This form-based code regulating plan has a relationship to other existing plans, such as the comprehensive plan, the design standards, downtown master plan, our city brand, and also our municipal code. So different pieces as we go through this, you'll see the design standards, for instance, are not spelled out in the form-based codes because it notes that the design standards still apply. And so same with, for instance, parking guidelines. The parking guidelines within this plan refer back to the municipal code. We separated the downtown commercial into two different districts or two different areas. One is the downtown commercial core or DC core, and the other is the downtown commercial mixed use or DCMU is how we've abbreviated it throughout the document. We still noted the historic district area on this map as well. So the downtown commercial mixed use or DCMU, the idea behind the mixed use area where the buildings will be generally occupied with the ground floor retail, office, service, or other active uses. Residential uses on the ground floor should, where permitted off North Bend Way, have frontages ensuring privacy for the units, and units shall be accessed directly from the street unless determined infeasible due to site constraints. Upper floors and back spaces from the streetscape should include a wide variety of uses, including office, housing, and lodging. The desired form for this area includes, as I mentioned, she'll meet the design standards using modern architecture that fits the character of recently constructed buildings within this area. New buildings range from smaller multifamily complexes to mixed use developments. I believe it's in the mixed uses up to 35 feet, so I apologize for this typo. Located in at the front property line with active frontages along the ground level. So in the mixed use zone, we're looking for, as we said, a mixed use or residential building character that fits the existing neighborhoods and the surrounding built environment. We want them to include balconies, terraces, and patios, commercial frontages with wide sidewalks and street trees to add interest to the public realm, comfortable and safe pedestrian walking environment, residential frontages that promote privacy, and the use of wood products as building materials. So this is where we have the basic requirements within the area. It talks about the different types of buildings that are listed in the regulating plan and are defined within the plan, and we can get into that later if you would like. Has the different setback minimums and maximums, and we also included a residential unit size limit of 1,200. There are exceptions listed in the plan. And it shows the different areas of where the buildings are allowed to be placed, what the different frontage zones are, and where parking is allowed to be placed if at grade. It also includes a table of the different frontages, which are also further described in the document, different kinds of what a forecourt or front yard or shop front or gallery or stoop are. The downtown commercial core includes ground floor buildings occupied by retail, service, and other active uses along the commercial corridors. Upper floors have a variety of spaces from including office, housing, and lodging. This one, we want to fit the existing historic building character and site design, adding to the public realm, enhancing this small district of North Bend's cultural center. New buildings are similar scale to existing structures to the property line and up to 45 feet in height. The building mass steps down to 35 feet where adjacent to existing single-story buildings or other historic buildings. The main features of this area include building character to enhance and blend with the current historical district, enhanced open space that adds to the public realm, similar scale to existing buildings, substantial glazing, balconies and rooftop patios, housing above commercial and retail storefronts, wide sidewalks and street trees, and heavy building bases with detailing that adds interest to the historic district. We also want to hope that we can get some shade, such as canopies and awnings, and pedestrian-oriented signage and lighting, as well as any amenities such as benches or outdoor seating. In the downtown commercial core, it gets a little bit smaller units for the residential, trying to create a scaling effect. So in this area, the residential units are limited to 1,000 square feet. Again, exceptions are listed based on affordability. In this transect, we want to look for historic character, and we also want to remind everyone that if it's within the historic district, it still has to go through those required reviews. And so this has the same detailing of minimum, maximum setbacks, and imagery to show the different stepping. So for instance, if they're next to a single story or historic, if they want to go to the 45 feet, it does have to be set back from the property line at least 25 feet. We wanted to put together a height comparison based on our current code versus this proposed form-based code. The image on the left shows you what it currently is allowed based on the description within the municipal code, and the areas that are allowed to be up to 45 feet and 35 feet within our proposed form-based code. There are different types of building types: live, work, court, hybrid, and flex are examples. Again, the document goes into details of those types of buildings, and the core has different types than the mixed use. Mostly the difference is in the commercial core. We're trying to restrict residential only uses and make sure that they're designed for office related in the bottom floor, where the mixed use allows properties to have standalone residential uses, as an example. One thing to point out is with a form-based code, it doesn't necessarily follow the allowable use chart in the municipal code. So it really is open to residential, commercial, and office related public and quasi-public and light industrial uses that can be contained within the building and cause no nuisance outside of the building or proposed development. We do have a list in our municipal code of uses that are expressly prohibited, and those are still and remain expressly prohibited. In addition to those uses, we are not allowing outdoor storage or outdoor vehicle sales within this area. We also are making specific that nuisance uses that are typically disallowed in downtowns or that are incompatible with residential areas, including hazardous materials and uses that produce noise, are also not permitted. So we have different frontage standards as well listed, talking about the different types of frontages we expect to see in these different areas. The frontage are the components of the building that bridge the transition and interface from the public realm to the building. Sometimes it can be a courtyard or patio, or just a front yard if it's dealing with a residential area. These are to ensure that the proposed developments are consistent with the city's goals for the building form and connect to the public access. So we have the street standards listed, and different major, minor arterials, and what we would be looking at in terms of a street section within this area. In addition to our standard code, we also have an open space park and plaza requirement within this area, specifically stating that corner properties within the DCC area, but outside of the designated historic district, shall have a plaza created at the corner to create an additional open gathering area for people. The project that involves at least 2 acres requires 5. In addition to that, projects that are at least 2 acres require 5% to be dedicated at open space. And projects that require the creation of public open space shall be required to develop the green square, plaza, or playground in accordance with the applicable design concept. Each project application that is adjacent to a public open space shall create site designs oriented to that, where facades of buildings have a greater level of articulation than may be normally required on a rear or side if it faces that open space. We also do a little bit of a zoom in of the idea of those different corner courtyards where it would take, a small piece of the corner where a building wouldn't be able to be put up, and we would want to see a plaza type use there. And that's all I have in terms of a presentation. And so we kind of wanted to turn it over to you to see where you wanted to go next, what you'd like to discuss, and go from there.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Commissioners, time for questions or conversation. Anybody want to start us off?
Commissioner Blanco has a question on your plazas, on your corner lots where you have the plazas. Is that maintained by the city, the property owner, or who takes care of those critical areas right there?
Well, when you look at if I pull up the map again, you'll see that some of them do encroach into the property line. So there's obviously going to be kind of a little bit of a mix. You know, if we're maintaining the street and the right of way, we're going to continue to maintain the street and right of way. But private property is still a maintenance responsibility of the property owner. Sometimes you might see benches or outdoor seating in those areas. So obviously those would definitely be maintained by those property owners. If they end up being part of street furniture, then we would take the responsibility.
So a little city, a little depends on how it cuts, how much they have, the private property owner who developed it, right?
Right. You know, the map has different amounts of space depending on the corners, but yes, and we're open to different configurations of development for those plazas. It could be some sort of entry monument landscaping kind of thing that people could sit around, you know, a planter and a bench. It could just be a wider, you know, I would say paved sidewalk, but I was thinking, you know, with pavers, you know, to add street interest and things like that, where people could just stand and wait for the street corner, for instance.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Blanco, a good illustration of that would be the corner of Park and Main at Huckstotter's, where how you have a wider sidewalk right there, but then you also have a closed area where you can have food and drink.
Right. That's what I was looking at, but I didn't know whether Huckstotler maintained that, whether part of it was city or a partnership, or who keeps it tidy is really what I want to know. I think they're a great thing to have, but I want them to look nice too. So I'm hoping that gets defined.
Commissioner Torgerson, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
On those same corners that we're talking about, how does the insurance get figured out on that? And, you know, you're inviting people onto your property that are just walking down the street. Who polices that if there's unsavory people and, you know, you don't want them camping out on the corner there? How does all that play out? Who are the responsible parties?
I think it plays out the same way any other private development, same as someone who's trying to camp out on QFC property. You know, they work together with the police department to follow the regulations.
Okay, and then what about insurance? I mean, is that city and private owner, or how does that work?
The property line isn't changing. So what's private property is still considered private property, and what's public right of way is still considered public right of way. It's just as if a restaurant had outdoor seating, they're probably insuring it and maintaining it. It's just we're trying to create a linkage at the corners because it adds interest as you're driving down the street.
Okay.
Anybody
A
else?
very similar example of that is Phoenix Plaza. If you look at Phoenix Plaza, there's a lot of plaza area out front, and that's private property except for an easement that takes you back to the park.
And so the city then maintains that easement, or that?
No.
No.
No, that's the private property owner.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a general question, Commissioner Mo. When did our city building height max go to 45 feet? I always thought that it was 35 feet across the board.
I'll have to turn that over to
I think
Mike.
that was a long time ago now. I'm guessing
wow.
about 8 years ago or so.
Okay, maybe I was just always focused in the downtown. All right, so thank you. It's before me.
So just to clarify on and follow up on that question, so there's no change in the building height itself?
There is a change to the area. If I can pull up the map again, if you guys would like to see the different.
So it expands the locations that can be 45 feet from what they are today, but the height itself isn't any higher than we already allow.
Correct. The height is not any different. And actually, I'm not sure that I would say it expands it. It moves it a little. It went further south, you know, and so there was differences before in the historic district versus the rest. And that area goes a little further south than we're saying we want to see now at that 45-foot height.
Isn't that by definition an expansion if you take where it is and move it further south, or are you?
I'm moving it less further south. It currently is further south than what we're proposing.
Okay.
Can you show that picture again?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I'll pull it right up.
Yeah, it looks like it
And-
expands a little bit to the north. More space can be the 45, but then
No,
it lowers it
that's
on the south side.
Okay, so
And can you explain what the blue and the purple are? We can't really read that.
yeah, so the blue is the 35 feet and the purple is the 45. So the picture on your left that has the purple all the way to the south of the area is what you're currently allowed in our current zoning, where on the right side, what we're proposing for the allowable height is the purple for 45 and the blue for 35.
So you're shrinking some areas and you're growing some other areas, correct? You're kind of just
Correct.
moving. Okay.
We're moving it around. I think overall it's probably a little bit less, but yes, it is just it's a little bit of movement.
Why are we making that change?
On that.
The change, and let me close the screen again if you guys are good. Exit out. The change is to align it with the districts, really is what we were proposing, is that the new boundary of 45 aligns with the core district and the 35 aligns with the mixed use district, instead of having some 45 in mixed use in some areas where it's not. So that's why we're proposing it the way we are.
It kind of seems like it's going backwards when you do that, because those people had their property rights where they could go to 45 and now you're taking it away, and it's really not any sort of benefit to take that away, other than it makes it easier to have definitions of different districts. I mean, if you want to do that, I mean, you could always, I guess, add another district for those people that already have 45, but it seems, I never like to take away from existing homeowners or property owners what they have as, defined, because maybe they've been planning for years to do a project, and then, whoop, we're going to change that on you.
I mean, that does happen. I mean, we're adding regulations for unit size and other different regulations. So as the regulations change, definitely someone who's been holding on their property for a long time, it can change the requirements. But we're here to listen to you and see how you want to direct your recommendation.
So
Yeah, I would say that for all property owners, we want them to have the best interest, for them, and not to take away from them. And, I think for all of the people that are property owners and people that lived here for a long time, it would be in their best interest to not take away, only to add value to their properties.
yeah, this is Gary. I'm going to go with Susan on this one. I'm struggling with, other than administratively, because it aligns with how we've defined the boundaries of those areas and what we're calling them. If the overall objective to the form-based code, at least partially, is for flexibility and to encourage development, all of those things, I'm struggling with seeing the downside to allowing the 45-foot boundaries to remain as is versus the justification to lower those allowable heights just so they kind of fit into the way we're defining those areas. So I'm having a hard time with that. I'm not opposed as much to them moving to the south, that additional area, kind of that new area. But where we allow 45-foot buildings today, I'm not seeing the rationale to take that away.
If I may, was this part of a response to the survey? Because if I remember correctly, wasn't the survey a pretty overwhelming response that height was an issue to see the mountains? So if we limit that 45 to closer to the downtown core, you're allowing that lower height to be the further out. So from downtown, you'll see more of the mountains with the shorter buildings.
I mean, the idea is to create a true downtown, you know, right now we've got a little bit of a mix in what's in this downtown commercial zone where someone could put right in the primary walking distance, for example, a single family home. So we're trying to make a core area that we see commercial on the bottom. We still allow residential on top. And so those are where we thought the 45-foot heights made sense versus the areas where you could still have residential only development and step those heights out as you leave that main downtown area. So that was the intent. But we're also open to what those boundaries also of what you think the core are. If you think that but not necessarily tied to height. I'm not trying to say it has to be tied to the height. We definitely can have different height areas. But we're also open to the discussion of what you guys feel the downtown core area should be versus the downtown mixed use.
Rebecca, this is Commissioner Blanco. I have a question, and maybe Mike or somebody knows. The new Huckstadter building. As I look at you, Rebecca, and I see the top of City Hall, which actually, from where I'm sitting, I don't get to see the top of them outside. So what I'm wondering is Huckstadter 45. Is that peak that comes up over Huckstadter 45, or is that 30? Do you know, Mike?
Jesse might know better. He'd reviewed that, but I'm guessing that's even lower than 35. That's
that's around 25.
About 25. It looks so much bigger to me than that, and that's fine. I just didn't know. And that's the same thing when you put that little, whatever it is on top of the City Hall. Is that considered a story, or is that just an architectural feature?
Well, we don't measure via stories. We just measure via height. So that whatever you see behind Rebecca there on the City Hall has to be under 35 feet.
Okay.
It's whatever architects do to make it look fancy. Looking at you, Leroy.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is maybe we should have a separate height map than the transect map and keep the heights the way they are currently. Is that sounding with the Planning Commission?
So I haven't said anything yet. That makes sense to me. I guess I'm sort of the same opinion that's been voiced so far, is unless there's a reason to change it other than just to have the height match the zone, I would say just leave it. If it's not broke, don't fix it, basically.
Are you guys comfortable of expanding it to the historic district area so that it's allowed to be 45 within the entire core as well?
That kind of makes sense to me. If the core is where we're going to have kind of our densest, most urban style of development, that might make sense.
Okay.
I agree.
You're talking about expanding it on the north side to correlate with the boundary then, but not shrinking it on the south side.
Yeah, so now all we're doing is making it bigger so we can have more of the area be 45 feet. Which goes against what the survey was saying that the people wanted to see.
I think the purpose of the survey was that so people could still see Mount Si, right?
Yeah, and so if you look at in your packet, pages 73 and 74 of the packet, there is, and if you could flip there rapidly, or I'll just explain it to you. If you look in the upper right, there's kind of cross sections of buildings, and some of the text needs to be edited for the DCMU section, but basically we're stating if a certain building is of a small height next to a new building, there needs to be a step back. So instead of having a straight up wall 45 feet, you have to go back a bit, which is kind of what's demonstrated on the rendering on the cover of the regulating plan. And so we felt that by the step backs, and though I'm not an architect, we are working with them, and one is on the call right now, that helps out the views of the mountains.
Jesse, This is Commissioner Blanco. On page 71, is that what you're talking about a setback? You see
No,
the
I'm
picture?
sorry. Oh yeah, 71. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, 71 is a demonstration of a setback. So you've got 2 stories up and then a setback in a 3rd story. And
Okay.
so obviously, you know, if you're like the person with the yellow shirt and the green backpack with the existing building now, you can't see them outside because there's a 1-story building right there. But we're thinking about folks across the street at the bakery or at the bike shop. Having that setback helps with the views, and also the intensity up on the street front, which is kind of like a big thing about the form-based codes is how does this enhance the public realm? You know, with these measures, with the plazas, with the building, you know, consistency. It's not so much what goes on inside, but how does it look to the public? And that's where we're really looking to you, the Planning Commission. Is it what we're prescribing fit what you feel will enhance the vibrancy of our downtown, as well as more housing options?
I have a question. This is Susan Torgerson. As far as housing options, I know this was supposed to help with the low-income housing or increase housing availability. Has anybody done the numbers? Like, if we just keep the zoning the way we have it now, does it cost the same to change the zoning to being form-based? Or going to form-based, does that mean the costs are higher for property owners to build those types of buildings?
Well, right now you could build a single family home on parcels in the downtown, whereas this makes kind of a minimum requirement of what you're going to build in a parcel. So, you know, we can make some hypothetical thoughts on what an individual property owner might do with their property, but recently single family homes have been built in our downtown, whereas this makes it so it's missing middle to low rise buildings are what will happen. It's the predictability that we're looking for and the maximum square footages as the tools to enhance affordability.
What are the size of the lots in the downtown area?
I mean, it varies. Some frontages are 60 feet. There's some that are over 2 acres. You know, if you were to combine all the Chaplin's parcels, that's about 3 acres. If you were to look at where Ace Hardware is, that's 3 acres. If you were to look at QFC, that's around 3 acres. And so it varies from a small kind of tiny old school craftsman home could fit on it with 5-foot setbacks to these larger contiguous parcels, which, you know, the larger ones, we wanted to add a provision at the end, which is page 98. You know, with these larger lots, people may come into our town with these visions on what they want to do with it, and we want to keep that open. So if it's there's a master planning provision, so if it's 2 acres or larger, then the DA process that you're all familiar with could be triggered, and then we could do a master plan type thing. But
So,
this is now.
As far as the small single-family residents, typically, what is the lot sizes for them in the downtown area?
Susan, those are 7,000 square feet on average. I mean, there are a lot of different sizes in the downtown commercial zone, but 7,000 is typical.
Okay. And currently, how many homes can you build on 7,000 square foot? Is that 2?
1.
Or is it only 1? Okay,
Just
only 1.
The other thing to mention is the form-based code prescribes maximum unit sizes, and that's an affordability strategy. So right now you could build a large luxury apartment building that maybe has 3,000 square foot plus size apartments. This caps the maximum size, and that way it keeps the cost down, which is one of the goals of this overall effort.
So hypothetically, if you had a 7,000 square foot lot, what's the maximum number of units you could build on that?
Well, that's the density question, and what the form-based code attempts to do is to avoid the density issue and instead prescribe what is the outside of the building, the maximum size of the building. And within that, it doesn't matter so much how many units you're providing.
But that the units are not above a certain square footage. And the exception to that could be seen on page 75 of your packet. There's an affordable housing provision. And so the way it's written right now, and of course it's subject to change, that if there's a certain percentage of deed restricted affordable housing, then the maximum size of the units may increase that percentage. So in the DCC zone, the core zone, if 20% of the units in a building are deed restricted affordable housing, then that 1,000 square foot maximum can go up 20% to 1,200 square feet.
I have a question about that provision. Does that increased square footage apply only to the affordable units, or does it apply to all the units?
Right now, as it's written, it allows it for all the units. So,
Okay.
you know,
The intent in that is so that they can make a little bit more money out of the market rate while guaranteeing affordable units. So I think the intent is expected that the market rates would be bigger and the affordable would probably be smaller.
Right. Well, I agree with that. I support that. Might I suggest that you clarify that, just so there are no questions? Clarify it in the language, that the increase could apply to all units.
Could or should?
Could.
Could.
However you want.
Is that, Commissioner Blanco here, is that a HUD rule? Is that how HUD sets up their loans that would finance something like this with the affordable in there? Or is that something that we can change? If they're HUD.
It's not a HUD standard. It's something we came up with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's it just kind of it sounded right, so we put it in there.
Yeah, we understood that there's sometimes a need for, you know, if we're wanting to get you know, a lot of times when we get these 1,000 square foot units, they're probably going to be affordable or more affordable, but who knows how long they're going to stay that way. By getting them to allow them to go a little bit bigger and deed restricting them for a longer term, that even as the market rates increase, they're still locked into those affordability standards. So it's letting them, you know, move some larger, bring in some more money in order to offset the affordable. And for us, it means that we get to get some guaranteed affordable units.
I just had a minor
If-
suggestion for a revision. On the previous page, there's a reference to that the provision on page 74. It says, like, the heading is maximum size for residential units, and then it says CDS2 for exceptions, and then I was looking for DS2. So if you could just write, you know, it's on page 75 or asterisk and put it as a footnote.
Okay, yeah, add the page number along with the DS2.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question on page 69. Actually, if you go to 60, well, I'll sort of it's not my case, but I'll build my discussion here. On page 67, applicability to municipal code, it says the provisions of this code, one we're talking about, when in conflict shall take precedence over those of other codes, ordinances, regulations, and standards except state and federal law. So this code supersedes when there's a conflict. If you go to page 69, at the top, RP1D says note on floodplain management. And it rightly brings in the whole notion that there's some floodplain standards that also have to be met. So my question is, if the floodplain standards conflict with the form-based code, wouldn't the floodplain standards supersede the form-based code in that situation?
Yeah, by law, federal law supersedes local law. which is why we made mention of it in there. Do you feel that that could be made clearer?
I think so, because our floodplain standards are locally adopted, even though the authority from them comes from federal law. So one might, if you get into an argument with somebody about it, they might say that these are local standards, the floodplain management standards, in terms of maybe some setbacks and some height of floors and that sort of thing. Am I? Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm not a floodplain management expert, but it just seemed like maybe some clarification.
Yeah. So you think the wording on page on the applicability section could be more clear? Yeah.
Yeah. One thing you might consider doing is specifically say that if floodplain, however you want to say it, if the flood, the chapter 14.12 floodplain management supersedes if there's a conflict.
Well,
Take a look at that.
And
That
to
might
that point,
work.
if there's anything else that, like floodplain, you're gonna have to be careful about overriding your own rules.
Yeah.
Critical area regulations would be the same boat.
But those are local. So they would, yeah, I guess this would override critical area regulations too, potentially, if there's a conflict.
Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, I still have another question. This is Susan. I was trying to understand. So with the form-based code, so I believe this is the middle zone in the downtown area, one of the middle zones, either 6 or 10. And so I'm going to give a hypothetical and explain to me how, if I'm understanding it or how it works. So let's say you have a 7,000 square foot lot, and somebody decided to build a building that was like, let's say it was 11 studios in there. And so you got the number of units as being 11 on a 7,000 square foot lot. Because you're doing form-based codes, is that okay, or is it hitting another rule?
Well, there's lots of rules they have to hit besides the density. For example, you still have to meet the parking requirements for that many units. So a lot of times you're going to be restricted on how many units you're going to fit when you have to put a parking space, 1.5 space for each unit in this zone. So there's lots of different codes that are going to affect the buildable area on each individual lot, depending on their size and what type of development they're proposing.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out, like, how much are we increasing the amount of low-income housing with these rules? That's where I'm struggling with, is trying to figure that what that is.
We can't give you a number because there's no guarantee some of these will be, it allows either residential or commercial. So we could have people for the next 10 years only build the commercial and not the residential component. We could have some that build the residential component and don't want to go with any guaranteed affordable, but because it would be limited to the unit size, could still be more affordable. But it's definitely an increase in the sense that someone who wanted to build residential now could build, as we said, a 4,000 square foot single family home in this area, where this code would prohibit that, and they're going to make more money off of putting multiple units.
Okay.
So it's hard to say because we don't know how these private property owners are going to develop or when they'll develop. So it's, we're just increasing the chances.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the highest and best use for 7,000 square foot lot right now, that they have like a single family house on there and they're looking to improve their land. What is the most that they can do with their property? And I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, it depending on which area it is, they might want to do live work units and put, a commercial space underneath and the residential on top. They may want commercial, all commercial. It's hard to say because it depends on what they want to do with their 7,000 square foot property. If they want a residential only, project, or do they want a combination of commercial and units? Some may want to just put a duplex, some may want to do live work.
That's the beauty of the form-based code, though, is it provides you with that flexibility. It's not prescribing what you can't do.
Mhm.
One of the things that we looked at in this code that we wanted to point out is we put requirements for the bottom floor for how high that bottom floor needs to be so that the flexibility remains. So if someone builds a residential only development, they still have to put 12-foot ceilings in that first floor so that in the future, if it wants to convert to commercial, it has that ability. If they build it as residential only at shorter heights, there's no chance without tearing down practically the building that it'll ever go commercial on the bottom floor. So we did put some standards to keep the flexibility to go back in between residential and commercial for the first floor.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say from my experience working with form-based codes, this actually gives a property owner a lot more that they can do with their properties. And there's fewer restrictions. There are some new restrictions in terms of maybe design and some of the like the step backs and height and that kind of thing. But what that does is it helps create a more cohesive downtown area, which is going to actually enhance their property values too. So I think it's a good deal for most I haven't looked at it lot by lot, but I would say generally these are good deals for property owners.
Yeah,
Very
I mean,
beneficial. And for the community.
yeah. I mean, highest and best use, a lot of people say commercial's highest and best use. So you could take what was a residential property and turn it to commercial, or, you know, it depends on what their opinion of the highest and best value for them are. Depends on what they can, you know, what they can get for rent in their commercial space versus what they can sell condos for versus what they can rent, you know, a live work unit for. So it's hard to say in this kind of scenario because it could change. You could build a live work unit and maybe change it to residential on top and commercial on bottom in the future and not have it as an actual live work unit.
So this is Gary. I'm a little slow on this, so I'll apologize for those that have a better grasp. I am still struggling with the benefit to the property owners, how it provides fewer restrictions, and maybe it's because I'm still at least mentally anchored to things like allowable uses and density, and those don't really go away here. They're just handled a little bit differently. So you know, you in your earlier presentation there was something in the slides about things that are considered nuisances will still remain nuisances, but it doesn't really spell those out in the form-based code. So it just feels like this references so many other locations within the municipal code that for me it feels more difficult to determine what actually could somebody do or what couldn't they do that might be an unintended consequence, that might actually be something we don't want to see, and we wouldn't realize that until we're reviewing some project. So, you know, we've got heights, so it tells a property owner you can't build beyond this height. It kind of has that step back rule for adjacent buildings. There's still the parking requirement, and something has to trigger the parking, which has traditionally been the use and the density associated with the use. So if it was a apartment building, for example, number of units drives number of parking stalls. So the parking requirements haven't gone away. We haven't changed those. We just reference those. And so and maybe Rebecca or Jesse or Mike, you can send me a dissertation or something separately to show me how we get from what from my experience has been like the traditional land use planning and how you deal with these things in the code regarding allowable uses, non-allowable uses, density, and that kind of stuff, to where this actually tells a property owner what the possibilities are for them that isn't a use.
So let me just give an example from our code. Right now, if you're in the downtown commercial zone, say you own property over by the library or something,
Right.
And you want to do you've got a business that's coming in that's research and development. In our code right now, for some reason, our zoning code says research and development is not a permitted use in the downtown commercial zone. That's kind of a really dull knife, because you don't know what's that research and development facility, the impacts of it are. So maybe it's just really office functions and you're doing little technology research or something. So what the form-based code says is it doesn't really matter what that particular use is. What are its impacts? If it doesn't have the impacts of the noise and the odor and other things like that, then who cares what's going on inside the building? But we do care what that building looks like. And so here's standards to make sure that it's creating an attractive building that's consistent with the overall character of the rest of the buildings in the downtown. And that way it creates a terrific neighborhood, but allows that flexibility.
But isn't that what allowable and non-allowable uses do? Is they're derived from risks and impacts. So where you don't see an adverse impact, you allow that use. Call it research and development. Where you believe there is a potential use that would have an adverse impact, you don't allow that, but you spell that out.
But it's always messy, and because it gets very pedantic, and it's always hard to predict what a particular impact is in relation to the use. And so instead,
we're just shifting the mess, the location of the mess. We're shifting the mess from trying to craft the traditional code that foresees all of these things and prevents what we don't think we want to happen, yet allows what we think we do want to happen, to creating less clarity around that, and then dealing with those impacts and the messiness when there's an actual project and a proposal, and then trying to mitigate those impacts at that time. Or am I just missing how this will
Commissioner Tal, let me ask you this. As our allowable uses that we're recommending, how it reads right now, how would you change it to feel better about the predictability of what would be built in the downtown? And so I'm specifically talking about page 76 in your packet under the building standards section. It's the third section down, called allowable uses, BS.1C. So we're trying to not be over prescriptive. So, you know, as Mike's R&D, example was, maybe R&D used to be, intensive manufacturing, and now it's a 3D printer the size of a sewing machine. It's like, as planners, we can't make a list so comprehensive that we, everything is covered. And so what we're trying to take this less intensive list approach to really, if it's inside the building and it's not noxious, hazardous, noisy, then it's going to be okay. What we're trying to get at is if the building owner next door, or if someone on the street doesn't know what's going on inside your building, which is often the case, then we shouldn't have our regulations focus on what goes on inside the building. And so, yeah, I guess I'm curious to know how could we make BS1C better?
Well, I mean, we basically, the way this is crafted, it's making my point. It's uses prohibited expressly in 1810. So you're referencing a list. The list exists.
We're referencing a list of all uses prohibited citywide. So
Right.
we instead of relisting those citywide, like you can't put a quarry there. You know, it's listing all of the expressly prohibited citywide uses.
Right. So if
We
it's
we
not
may want to
expressly
clarify.
prohibited, isn't it implied that it's allowed?
I think we need a clarification there that might get it to what you're talking about, Gary. That list of prohibited uses is not the general zoning table. It's a separate list at the very end of 1810.030 that says the following uses are specifically prohibited in all zoning districts. And it's talking about really nasty stuff like it's concrete batch plants, asphalt plants, primary metal industries, foundries, really terrible stuff that you don't want in your downtown anyway.
So I'll use another
But let me
example. I mean, Mike, to your example on the research and development, if it isn't allowed, but we want it to be allowed, it seems like we could amend the list to allow research and development, and that there's other provisions of the code that would prevent that R&D facility from being an obnoxious neighbor to somebody else in the zone. But also going back to, say, the marijuana retail, for example. You know, one of my issues with that whole conversation was the zones that the applicants were proposing for those locations didn't allow for that use. So if we, as a city, from a policy standpoint, if we believe marijuana retail was a suitable use, we should amend the zoning code to allow it, instead of dealing with it as like this one-off development agreement that provides this exclusive right to one person. So now we have the ability to restrict marijuana retail, and I'm not commenting good or bad, I'm just using this as an example that does have some emotion within the community on both sides of it. We're now saying that because it's not prohibited in this area, it might now be allowed, and the downtown core, highest and best use, might become a corridor of marijuana retail and related uses, which I'm not really sure that's the vision. So it just feels like we're, in the attempt to create some certainty and clarity from a property owner standpoint, we're actually feels like the opposite from a public policy and planning standpoint, and that the city staff, the administrator, is going to be much more closer to the actual developments as they arise and go through the process than planning commission or city council might be, and those are the policy bodies. And so it just seems like we're delegating the use discussion when I'm not sure we need to, let alone we should. And again, that's everybody else may feel much more comfortable with how this is structured and the intent and the application. Those are just some of the areas that I'm kind of struggling with. You know, what problem are we really trying to solve? How do we know it's a problem? And might we be actually creating some unintended issues by putting this document in place with pointers to all of these other things that may or may not apply? And I don't know if that makes much sense. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here at the moment, but those are sort of my initial concerns with the approach. And I'm
So Gary, I can give you my perspective as a planner for 12 years. And I guess my overall feeling is there's always going to be unintended consequences. That's just the natural effect of changing something. However, from my experience working with so many different applicants that have been interested to do something good in the city, there are so many layers of regulation that prevent something good from happening that, in my opinion, we want to take away roadblocks to allowing good projects from happening. And I feel like the zoning code is an easy thing to simplify by focusing on what's important rather than what's happening inside the building. So what is the impact of this use on the neighborhood rather than does it fit within a particular list of predetermined uses?
Okay, I'll move on. Thanks.
Yeah,
hear you when
and I can add to that. I was trying to think of an example because I know I've come across it where I've had two proposals that fit the same definition, and one was a good project and one was not. I think R&D is probably a good example, but I couldn't think of anything else off the top of my head. You know, and the issue comes up as in my many years of doing this, it does become very time consuming to move a project forward if you have to update the allowable use chart every time you get a new project. You know, I worked in a city that we had a downtown and we never thought we might get indoor sports like a batting cage, you know, and so we had and that was something they missed the opportunity because we had to go through the time to add, you know, to notice and update the code for that allowable use when it had no impact to the surrounding businesses to have an indoor you know, an indoor batting cage in that scenario. So I was trying to think of another one where it had two different types of uses where one was, you know, good and one was bad. An example that is not specifically listed that, for instance, wouldn't be allowed would be like a vehicle repair. That there's, you know, that makes a lot of noise, that would have impacts to residential. You don't necessarily want, you know, a vehicle repair shop right below a house or right next door to a house. So that's where the judgment would be made that says, okay, those have noise and other impacts to the neighborhoods, you know, that this would allow us to prohibit. But yes, you're right. A list saying that's not allowed to would work as well. Obviously, the idea behind the form-based codes is exactly to remove those allowable use tables because we're looking at the form of development versus the uses within the building.
This is Commissioner Torgerson. I believe I read in this big packet somewhere. Now I can't find it. One of the purposes for, one of the goals for doing form-based is to help increase housing in North Bend. And that's where I'm running up against well, if I could make it fit with the form, with the parking and all that, and I could do, let's say I was able to do 11 units, but I run into the rule that no, you can only do so many units in downtown. I feel like that's those are two little rules that are kind of running into each other. On one hand, you want to make more housing, and on the other hand, we've got a cap. And it seems like the cap should be the amount of space I have and the ability in that form to create that project. That should be the cap and not just some number that's 6 or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to get at. Instead of having a dwelling units per acre, the focus is more, you know, how the building looks and how it compares to. So yeah, that's exactly what we don't want, like a cap. We don't want to make some arbitrary number.
Where are you seeing that cap in the document that you were referring to?
My understanding is that right now the downtown area is part of the middle zone, where we've got the cap of 6 and the cap of 10, and I don't remember which is which.
No, the medium density is a different area than the downtown commercial.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's not there anymore. Okay, because it was there at one point.
No, it's a different area. The medium density is where cottage residential is. This project is where downtown commercial zone is.
Okay, that's
So
what I was hung up on.
Two different zones, yeah.
The only thing that relates is they're both from the same grant funds, these efforts.
Yeah.
That's the only thing in different areas.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no cap, unless you count building heights. That's the cap.
Okay. Okay, that's the form cap.
Yes.
So just back to that question. So is that why the code changes at the very beginning of this document, which talks about the 6 units per acre and 10 units per acre? Is that why that's in there? It's because it's part of the same grant program?
Yes,
You know what I
there
mean?
is some.
So I was
There's
confused when I
overlap.
first saw that.
There's some overlap in the code sections because those chapters address the descriptions of the zones. And so that's where you're seeing some of the description of the medium density residential zone here. And that'll still be coming back. The council hasn't made their approval on that. They want to explore that a little bit further. So we're not exactly sure yet how that's going to work out. But for now, that's just shown as a kind of a placeholder.
Sis, are you ready?
Sorry, what was that?
I think that was Judy.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, the section that you see that information is just the amendment of the zoning districts, creating this in one of those zoning districts.
Yeah, we instead of having two separate documents of the same code section, we just Mike and I combined it all in one. So now I get why that was confusing. Yeah. So council elected not to approve that, and we're currently we're kind of regrouping and seeing how we could approach it. And it's possible that we might, we're not quite sure how we can do this yet, but maybe tie in the MDR with the form-based codes. We'll see.
Any other questions?
Okay, so is this like an introductory and then we vote on this at a later date, or?
So basically this is our draft document. We didn't want to come to you at a public hearing and say, here's what staff's proposing. We wanted your input into the document. So we wanted your direction to make changes before we put out, before we come back to public hearing to say, okay, this is the document we worked on together, in a sense. And so far, what I've written down in terms of direction is the dealing with the heights, that you don't want any decrease in heights, but you're comfortable with allowing the 45-foot height in the historic district. Clarify the affordable unit size allowed, so that if they've got an affordability restriction, that the unit size increase is allowed on any of the units. I have a note that says anytime there's a reference to another section that you'd like us to add the page number, so that if it says, the exception on, OS2, that it's got page, whatever page it is next to it. Make sure that we reference the critical areas and floodplain areas, so that no one confuses that those can't be overridden. And then this kind of open comment regarding that we have on the allowable use table on whether or not we're keeping it as a true form-based codes, or whether you guys want to incorporate an allowable use table. I mean, that's difficult, and I don't know. It's not difficult. I take that back. It's easy to paste in an allowable use chart, but that's obviously not the intent of a form-based code. And we'll have to. I don't know. Not that it matters, because we want what you guys want, but I don't know how that ties in with the grant. If we're it's no longer really a form-based code if we're putting in a full allowable use table. But I don't want that to be a reason that you guys don't do what you want to see in this document.
I have a question.
Rebecca, before I just want to, since I was the one kind of driving that allowable use thing, I mean, I think an alternative approach might be to spell out either in the form-based code or in the kind of the narrative that goes along with it. What is it? Because you've said a few times that we don't care what goes on inside the building, and I'm not okay with that. I'll just tell everybody. I think we do care what goes on inside the building. It's just within what limits, so
Yes.
what are those adverse impacts that we're trying to prevent? Are they noise? Are they emissions? Are they, what are they? And maybe approach it from that end, so at least there's something in the documentation that kind of creates some parameters for what we want to see and what we don't want to see, that stops short of a list of uses, but more is maybe criteria, positive criteria, negative criteria, something along those lines. Does that make sense?
So Commissioner
Yes, but I'm not. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can I read this paragraph under allowable uses, and then you could tell me what we should add or take away from? Is that okay? It'll just take me a moment. So BS.1C allowable uses on page 76 of your packet says open to residential, commercial, office related, public and quasi-public, and light industrial uses that can be contained within and cause no nuisance outside of the building or proposed development. Uses prohibited expressly in 1810-030, which we will later embellish on, that's all disallowed uses within the city. So uses prohibited expressed in that section, in addition to outdoor storage or outdoor vehicle sales, are not allowed in the DC zone. No nuisances that are typically disallowed in downtowns and are incompatible with residential uses, including hazardous materials and uses that produce noises above what is currently allowed in NBMC 8.26. So that's as it reads right now. What like if you could give just some general guidance on what you feel could be added to that, then that'll help how we can fit.
I'm glad you asked, because I did have some issues with that paragraph, mainly the words. So a nuisance in this document, nuisance is undefined. At least I couldn't find a definition of nuisance. So that appears to be very subjective. Now, there are some cases where you've followed up nuisance with including these examples, but I think there are other nuisance examples that could go in here. And again, a nuisance is a pretty subjective term without a definition. So the other part of it that I struggled with is typically disallowed. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's typically disallowed. What is typically disallowed? Where does that apply? Are we talking about typically disallowed in small towns like North Bend, in big cities like the city of Seattle, rural areas, urban? I don't know what things are typically disallowed, which would allow me to see, okay, what might be allowed. Do you see what
I see what you're saying. I'm trying to think of how we can address it. I don't think it's something I'm going to be able to come up with at this meeting. Maybe it's something that we can reach out to you as we try and draft some additional language, before the next meeting, basically.
Well, and I guess that's a fact for me. If you have a statement that says something is typically not allowed, that suggests it's common knowledge that cities don't allow this to happen. There ought to be some examples that are front of mind.
No, I understood that's not, I'm sorry. What I'm saying, I understand you're concerned with the issues that are too general, such as typically disallowed and nuisance. And I agree that those can be clarified or defined. That's not my question is trying to come up with the language that you were talking about. What criteria is yes and what criteria is no is not something that I can just think up off the top of my head right now. And so working with you, over the next week or two to so I can do some research and draft some language to see if that, if that's within your intent, because I understand what you're getting at, and I don't have an issue with the comment that it is too general, what typically disallowed and nuisance not being defined. And so I'm willing to work on language to specify it a little bit better, to see if we can get to where you guys are comfortable.
Appreciate that. Thank
you. So nuisance is defined in 8.08 in our municipal code, so we should probably reference that. We shouldn't come up with a separate nuisance definition within our same city code. Now that you've spelled out the typically disallowed, it is vague, and yeah, I think that should be the focus of our effort. But are you fine with us just referencing how nuisance is defined already in our municipal code, or do you feel that because of the nature of this code that it should be something more specific?
No, I think if we have a list of nuisances that's already established, I think if this document can point to that section of the code, then it becomes consistent with how we've approached some of these other code references. And I think that's fine.
We need to define typically disallowed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get what you're saying. I think maybe even the confusion and the reference on the prohibited uses, that's not a very long list. I don't think there's necessarily an issue with us incorporating a separate, expressly prohibited list instead of trying to reference that section. And that way, if there are other uses that you guys want to expressly prohibit, then we can go that way. The one I'm trying to think of is the more difficult possibly is trying to come up with, if you guys, other consequences, like you were saying, the cannabis or marijuana uses, as you were mentioning, whether, okay, if we don't want to allow, 10 marijuana retails, then, that maybe it's a separate section we need to add where we only allow so many per our population, and things like that. So I'm trying to think of other uses that we may want to either maybe conditionally permit, so we say, okay, we allow everything, but these are conditionally permitted, or these are not permitted, and trying to come up with some language for criteria, like you were saying. And so I'm going to have to think about it to see if we can come up with criteria to clarify that really the intent is to be retail, office, but it's hard to think, but have no impact to the neighbors. So trying to find a more specific way to spell that out, so that people have more comfort in knowing that their use would be allowed or not allowed.
Right.
Well, and not only just to the something like a marijuana, but also you probably don't want to have the same use all the way down the road, a block of all the same uses, same types of stores, something like that, because that eventually doesn't look good either.
Sometimes it is. I love vintage markets where they have all these vintage shops and antique shops. I love that.
Well, there's nothing that we have in our existing code that would prohibit that anyway, as long as that was a permitted use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might, it would be weird if there was like yarn shops 8 in a row, but I'd like to think that the market would dictate that that won't work. But
what if we have a whole block of restaurants and bars, we might want to in our downtown versus, so putting a generic would be more difficult.
Hey, Planning Commission, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a note on the marijuana retail DA, because I was a part of that at the very beginning in June of 2018. We did start editing 18.60 to allow it in more areas because it's so prohibitive as the code stands right now. We had direction from council that they want to see what one marijuana retail establishment looks like, how it feels in town before opening up the code. So that it's, that was a council direction to do it. That wasn't, a limitation of our allowed uses, or, yeah, I just, I understand the frustration, of, it's like it's the DA's been kind of used as a manipulative tool, but it was really councils wanted to get a feel of it before diving in head first.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Not that it has anything to do with the form-based codes right now.
Is there any other part of the regulating plan or the code that you guys saw as concerning that you'd like to point out for us to either address now or look at for the next meeting?
On page 97, it's the short paragraph on playgrounds, and it's the second sentence. It says, a playground should be fenced and may include an open shelter. It just, from what I've seen around here, like the Skyview, Cedar Falls, even the community center, a lot of those playgrounds are unfenced. And I've got a 2-year-old, and if you're paying half attention, don't really need to be fenced. So it's just wondering, I just saw a little inconsistency there.
Oh, you have one of those well-behaved 2-year-olds.
Because I was going to say, I was visiting somewhere that was fencing, and it was nice to be able to sit near the opening and not worry as much about my child running off.
Maybe there's clarification there about fenced against hazards or busy streets or something like that.
Yeah, that would work.
So along those kind of same thoughts.
And doesn't the word should indicate something that is not required?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for noting that, Commissioner Greenberg. Yeah, I wrote that because it seemed like fences are good, but maybe not in all situations. So it's with the should in there, Commissioner Bush, do you feel that we should still take out the fences, or because it sounds, I only have a 7-month-old, so I can't speak on what happens when it starts running.
I don't know. I didn't think it was necessary. It felt like a strong recommendation, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah, if we don't put it in, then maybe they'll still add fences. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I guess it might be something that we don't need to call out. I think open shelter is good considering the amount of rain.
Yeah. Definitely.
So one of the things I like to harp on is looking at that Plaza map. It did look like there's at least a couple lots that were pretty limited in their buildable space with the Plaza on both ends. Has there been any math done to make sure that a percentage isn't being excessive, that given up to public space that might make that lot unbuildable or unusable?
I mean, the map doesn't have dimensions, so it's identifying where we want it. If you want to add more, Jesse, go for it.
Gotcha.
There are more specific standards or design standards about plaza areas.
Yeah, and the next round we'll have. I got a map from our architects right after we sent the packet out. That was my bad in not getting the sequence of dates right, that you guys didn't get to see it. But with the zoomed in version, that's just the DC core, you'll notice that those plazas go onto the right of way quite a bit. And so it's like really just a corner of the private property. So I think I'd like you to see the map that's going to be figure 6 in there too, and then let me know what you think.
Yeah, I just like to make sure that that's one of the things that really bugs me about it, is being, when a lot is limited by something that the city's saying you have to put in, and essentially can make it unbuildable, right? Or too erroneous to build on. So as long as you guys have thought about that I didn't
Yeah.
see anything that said specifically you can't do that to that lot.
Yeah, it's more just like the opening up the building facade right on the corner to allow something like you see at Huckstadter.
This is Gary again. At the other item, I'm still a little uncertain how I feel about is the building heights. I definitely don't believe we need to adjust the building heights down from where we have them today, the blue area today. But on the other side, going further north, that's where I do struggle a little bit because so much of what I believe people enjoy about the businesses that we have in that downtown core are the view corridors, and to be able to see Mount Si and the foothills and all of that. So I'm still a little torn and uncertain on how I feel about kind of further expanding that building height to the north. Is there a way, there were several renderings that were in the materials, but none of them were really oriented towards Mount Si. Is there a way to incorporate into the materials kind of some notional view corridors of what it might look like, say from the Huckstadter Plaza or the bakery, if there was more build out there in that downtown core to that height level, and how those step backs might mitigate that. I think building heights is an issue for people in town, and I think the survey did reflect that. So,
but what I took away from the discussion is that we're keeping the heights limits the exact same, except we're adding it to the historic district area, the 45. So we're not looking at expanding it further north with what the direction I heard today.
Oh, okay. I did hear the historic district, but I didn't hear that we weren't going to add the purple to the north.
Okay.
That was still in.
Yeah, what I heard, yeah, if everyone's in understanding, what I heard was we're keeping the boundaries exactly as they are, but we're filling it in the purple. So from the existing allowed use, that's what it sounded like I heard is what you guys wanted.
Got it.
That's what I thought also.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I have written down. Commissioner Tao, would you prefer that we kept the historic district the way at the 35 feet and not go up to 45? So everything remains the same as it currently exists in the code, or what are your thoughts on that specifically?
Well, I mean, that's probably where I am on that particular topic. I mean, I'm okay if we want to put it out there for the public hearing and see how the public reacts to that and what kind of comments we may have, because that would be a change. But I mean, just personally, I'm struggling with whether that makes sense to do in that historic district, given some of the concerns that have been voiced about building heights and just some of the impacts to those view corridors from some of the development that has taken place already. But again, it depends on how the other commissioners feel. I'm okay with leaving the proposal in there for the public hearing, and then we take it up after that, if that's okay with everybody else.
I'm 100% in agreement with you, Commissioner Tao. I feel like I'm personally against increasing the heights, but I do want to hear what the public has to say about it. And if they're okay with it, then I will be okay with it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you too.
Yeah, I would think that's okay. I also like to see, Rebecca, the two maps that you showed. So more of an existing versus proposed might be helpful someplace in the process. I didn't see those in our packet.
Yeah, we prepared them just for the presentation to compare what the height requirements. We basically tried to create a graphical image of what the height requirements would be. Now that we're keeping them the same, we'll have to incorporate a graphical image of heights anyways into the code. So we'll now have a height map incorporated into the regulating plan.
Okay.
Commissioner Blanco here. I have a question on that. I was trying to look at the flood maps in the areas and seems like it's kind of all over the board in that area. Some are a little more restrictive, and having looked at some of them, isn't that going to change the height of what we're going to build? When you start, for like Mike, like when we did Pulte, I mean, the mound of dirt that went in and out of that place to get it up there for the right height for the flood was really quite impressive. And so I'm wondering, when we build, I'm not going to build, but when the developer comes in to build, I don't assume the city's going to build all this project. Is that correct? We're having developers come in to do this. Is that area that, let's say 3rd Street, right across from the elementary school, that row of houses there. I live in one of those houses, we'll say. So I inherit that house, and all of a sudden, I'm going to get a notice that, guess what? It's all going to be redone and re-townhouses and that. So this little house that maybe I inherited is all paid for. Maybe I just want to stay there, but I'm not going to be affected by the flood. But the people that come in to build these things, is that going to have to be built up, and then we're going to allow 35 feet on top of that? Or how does that work?
The way that our height limit works now is it's measured from your average base elevation. So it doesn't matter whether or not you've got a tall foundation to elevate the building for flood requirements. It's still measured 35 feet, for example. It's just measured from the points around the foundation at the ground, and whatever that average is, you can go up 35 feet from there. So it's regardless of flood elevating the structure for flood regulation.
So is that the same with the cottages that were built over here? Why there's same thing like that? There's nothing on that level. There's no electrical or anything on that garage level. So that doesn't count. So it starts at the front door?
No, it doesn't start at the front door. It starts at the ground, at the average base elevation.
So would there be parking underneath these things? Like the high school has, there's a classic example. All that underneath there is it's in the flood zone. So the parking at the high school is underneath, so the water runs through it, so to speak. Is that what some of these designs? I like the designs. I'm not opposing the designs. I just wanted to see how they're going to look with floodplain restrictions, because I'm not sure it's the end product is what it's going to look like, and so that's my concern.
Yeah,
so
let me comment on. Let me talk floodplain regulation for a moment. So you mentioned Pulte River Glen. That was what was called a letter of map revision on fill. The study alone to make that happen cost several $100,000. In order to pencil that out, you have to have a development the size of Pulte River Glen, which probably wouldn't happen in our downtown. What's required is you need to have compensatory storage, which is where if you're putting up fill in one area, then you need to take away another one. So now they have the floodway going around. Now, as far as uses go and height above the floodplain, you are allowed to have non-residential uses as long as they're flood-proofed according to our code currently 2 feet above base flood elevation. So if you were to walk into Huckstadter, you would notice that the bottom 3 feet are actually flood-proof materials. And there's these things that you slide in the door that make it so if there's flooding, it keeps water out. Now that's if it's a non-residential use. And there is a lot of FEMA documentation, and I was actually tempted to put it in this document, but once you cite a certain document and then the code gets old, then that document gets old. So you can have mixed use where the bottom floor is commercial, and if it's flood-proofed, then yes, you bring up a good point. And today we talked about we want the 12-foot heights because it could be residential now, but then it may not be residential later. Well, if you choose to flood-proof the bottom floor in the floodplain, which is everywhere in our downtown, then you've already limited to non-residential uses. But with that said, the second floor and above can be residential, and there's a lot of FEMA documentation on that. And if a developer were to come in, then either myself or our floodplain consultant would share that material with them. So often what you'll probably see in the more commercial areas is just different materials used, and you might not even notice. But if it was purely a residential use, then yes, we actually decided to take out some frontage options. There was a light court frontage option because it went below grade, and below grade in a flood zone just means that the water is going to go in there. And so what will probably happen with these residential areas is you'll have like a stoop, a 3 foot elevated to the base floor. So the base floor elevation is, I just say 3 feet because a lot of our downtown zone is what's called A01. That's where in the 100-year floodplain, you'll have waters are modeled to be up to 1 foot above the ground. And so you have to have your lowest adjacent grade be 3 feet above the ground. And so does that make sense?
It does make sense, but and that's what I needed to hear, that I wasn't, we start off here, we go 35 feet up or whatever it is. And we've got, we're walking up 2 flights of stairs just to get to the front door because and then we start from there and,
But I want to clarify.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about two different things. So the overall height of the building that you can do is not affected by the flood elevation. So that's 35 feet. If it's 35 feet, it's just from the ground up 35 feet.
Okay.
So you
and you can still park underground. That doesn't, if you've got a 12-foot underground parking, that doesn't take away also, if you're allowed 45 feet high, you don't take away 12 feet just because you went 12 feet underground either.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Because I'm looking at some of those. In fact, I went over there to walk those streets. I mean, those are people that live there. So when they hear this, they're going to, I don't want our residents to freak out that, people are coming in there to do that because maybe, I just want to be mindful of how that's going to play on a lot of the private homes in that area that's going to have, when we do this public hearing, that we're very mindful of that. It's not happening tomorrow. And I don't know what that changes their taxes or how that works, but I think we should all be aware of that when those are some of the questions that we just might get from folks like that live over in those areas. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, anything else?
I'll make a, go ahead.
Yeah,
I just have a quick question, but if yours is connected, you can go ahead.
I doubt it is.
Okay, mine's totally not about flood or anything.
Go for it.
My question is about the land use performance standards. It's in table 18.10.050. And it's under the hotel and motel. It says that the commercial building height in the IMU zone may be increased to 55 feet. I'm assuming this is for the hotel and motels only. Is this how it is now, or is this something that we're changing?
That's the way it already is.
That's, yeah, current.
Excellent. That was it. Thank you.
Are there any more comments? I kind of have like a final note I'd like to make. All right, I'll go ahead. I just wanted to say that though we have our public hearing tomorrow, what we don't want you guys to feel is rushed, and that we could make the public hearing last 3 different sessions. We understand that this is or more. We understand this is a big potential change. It's a very new concept. We don't want you to feel like we're trying to rush you at all. We're not only did the grant deadline get extended, but we're fine not making that deadline because that's an arbitrary deadline, and we would much rather have you all feel like we've had adequate input. So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. That's good comment, that we're mindful of deadlines, but the deadlines aren't hard and fast. And
yeah, the deadlines aren't what's important. What's important is we get a document that works for you guys in council, and that it's what you guys want to see. We understand, the initial comment that we came in is understanding the protected protecting the property rights of the property owners, but we also want to make sure that we're, encompassing the city vision for the future as well. And if that takes time, that takes time. That's all that matters.
Sure. All right, are we ready to wrap that up? I'll take that as a yes. Rebecca, Mike, Jesse, anything else then that you want to discuss before we close things out?
Is there anything else you'd like to see for our presentation, for example, at the public hearing? Like, I know we'll probably go over what I did again, just because it'll be a public hearing, but was there something else you would like incorporated into the actual PowerPoint so that it's easier to pull those graphics up or something like that?
Yeah,
Yes, Scott.
I have a suggestion building off of Commissioner Belanco's, or maybe I can't remember. I think it was Commissioner Belanco made the point about the property owners there today, and this is going to be a large change, and we need to really inform them what it is. I think some notion of what the rules are today versus what is in the proposal. Just, you could do it at a summary level where that's appropriate, or if it's changing a number from 35 to 45, point that out, because personally, from what I've read, I don't think this is a huge change. I think it's sort of reorganizing how we're doing some things. There may be elements of it that are a large change, but I think overall it's not like saying we're going to take our downtown core zoning and change it all to industrial. That's a huge change in my book. So I think that would help.
Yeah, I'll see if I can maybe put a bullet point of new requirements or things that are, and a bullet point of no longer allowed requirements, or something to that effect, a listing of some of those. I mean, it's hard to do a difference because it depends on how it develops, but I can definitely put together, hey, with this code, we are now requiring this, and that which wasn't required before, and we are no longer allowing this, which was allowed before, as an example. I can try and put a summarized bullet point slide like that.
Yeah, that would probably even help as you do your SEPA review.
I'm thinking also just something very visual for the sake of the public.
Yes.
So we talked about the example of a research and development facility. Maybe we have a simple 2 pictures showing the same building, and say one has got a research and development facility inside of it, the other one has an office inside of it. And just to see kind of the overall idea is we're focusing on what the outside of the building is and what are the impacts to neighbors, not what's happening inside.
And that's one of the big things you see if you read about form-based codes. It shows you with a standard zoning, you could get this or this. With form-based codes, you're getting this. When you've, the big difference is the city of North Bend always had bulk and dimensional codes. So you're right in the sense that our form-based codes are not that far off. I've worked at cities that only have, the big thing is I've worked at cities that have only minimum setbacks, where North Bend already has some maximum setbacks. So it isn't a huge change in that sense, where in other cities it is a big change, because you're differentiating a bunch of parking in the front with a further setback versus having what a little bit what we already have. So not all the pictures always fit when they talk about comparisons of traditional zoning to this community, but I think we could put something together.
Yeah, that would be good. And then I'll just kind of restate, I think if there's a way that you can incorporate some kind of rendering or something to simulate the view corridors. I mean, the real premise here is that there's development in the downtown. And when we start talking about the form-based code and the building heights and setbacks and so on, having some visual of what that might look like from ground zero, if you will, in the downtown core at the sidewalk level, I think it would certainly be helpful for me. but I think many other members of the public, that's really what they're going to care about.
Yeah, I'll see what we can do there. That's usually a view study. So I'm not sure that's something that we would be able to put together in time. But we'll discuss it with our, with our consultants and see what we can put together.
Yeah, I appreciate that's not maybe an easy ask, but I think it could be helpful to this whole process. All right, staff, anything else?
I don't have anything else.
If not, I think we're ready to call it a wrap. Commissioners, anybody have anything for the good of the order before we move to adjourn? If not, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right. Motion made by Commissioner Greenberg, seconded by Commissioner Blanco to adjourn tonight's meeting. I would just like to compliment staff. I think excellent presentation, excellent discussion. Good to see how this process is moving forward. So I really appreciate all the work that you're putting into it, and we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I know a tremendous amount of time and conversation going on internally leading up to these presentations and these meetings. So good job. Thank you very much. And as always, the commissioners, I think great discussion, good questions, insightful comments. I enjoy being part of this group. So thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to add, now that we've adjourned a little bit, is that the council is looking at having the chairman of each of our commissions come and give a report of the 2020 activities of each commission. Commissioner Tao, I did email you earlier about that and kind of gave you a summary and a possible date, but any support when that day comes up, we'll probably email all of you. So I just wanted to make you aware so that you can come to that council and show your support for your chairman. And that way the council can see your faces again all together at a council meeting about the planning commission.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I did see your note, but I just saw it today. So
no problem.
The date is fine, and then I'll just get with you and we'll kind of finalize the list and discuss, how all of that should go. And then,
yep, absolutely.
So awesome. That's awesome. First time since I've been on the planning commission that we've been invited to do that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an annual thing. They even talked about maybe another time you guys come back once the work program is discussed and talk about the work program as well. But I know initially they just kind of wanted to talk about 2020 accomplishments. So I think it's going to be something we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you. And then separate but somewhat related, I know on the look ahead in the packet was the public hearing for the 11th, but looking a little further ahead, Mike, I think Rebecca, you and I had an email conversation sometime in March, I believe. The chair and co-chair terms for myself and Commissioner Greenberg are expiring. And I think we talked about one of our meetings in March, electing new chairs and co-chairs. So just kind of putting that out there that sometime in March or so. So if any commissioners might be interested in either of those positions, give some thought to it. And maybe we can actually put that date in the next look ahead when we have our meeting on the 28th. All right, so we've got a motion to adjourn that's been seconded. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Hey, any opposed? None opposed. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Great
you.
meeting. See you next time.
Hi, Bree. Bye, Bree. Finally see you at the end. See you later.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye, everyone.